I'm just gonna get the chat. All right, we're live.
All right.
So I don't think there's anybody here yet, but this is, of course, a new thing that I decided to try out. Oh, I'd done this. Oh, I'd done this once before, and this is Subscriber Appreciation Day. So I, on New Year's, did a stream because I thought that everyone would be at home hungover and just kind of want to chill out. And so I kind of did like a 2016 retrospective, and it went
Yeah, I
down really
remember
well. The viewers really liked it.
How do we know if people are watching?
Well, there's five people, four people now. Meses Retes just showed up.
Oh, I had to hit refresh. Okay, there we go.
So I did this stream last year, or last 3 months ago, and it went down really well. And then I've been trying to do some more community-based stuff, and so I thought that a monthly stream where I talk to subscribers and have a good time would be a way for us to all get to know, kind of have more of a relationship. And since you and I are hot off of our big month-long collaboration, I thought it'd be a good time to show you off to everybody.
Hello, everybody who is watching.
So for those who are watching, or for those who will be watching soon, Cypher here is the host of the Cynical Historian, which is like a history-focused education / movie review / now gaming channel.
I don't know if the gaming thing is going to keep on going. It hasn't had that good of a reception.
Okay. So talk a little bit about. I don't want to frame this like it's an interview or something, but to get started, like for the people who haven't met you before, kind of introduce yourself a little bit.
So, as you said, I'm Cypher, the Cynical Historian. I review movies for their historical accuracy half the time, and the other half the time it's just kind of whatever kind of episode I want to make. A lot of the time, it's just me saying some argument that I've been repeating to people all the time, or other times it's like what I have going right now, which is the history of California, because I'm a Californian historian. So
yeah, you're from the deserty part of America.
Well, now I'm living in San Luis, so San Luis Obispo, so it's awfully green out there right now.
Here too, surprisingly, March this time, like I'm starting to notice now that the planet is slowly dying, because March is supposed to kind of still be a heavy snow month, and it is 16 degrees out today.
I've never lived in a place that gets that cold. Oh, I was in Afghanistan for a little bit, but other than that,
it's 60 degrees American.
Oh, I'm forgetting that. I thought you meant 16 degrees, like Fahrenheit.
That's cold. You said you've been to Afghanistan?
Yeah.
Well, how did you end up there?
I was in the Army for 6 years.
Oh, okay. That's a good. That's an explainable reason to go. I would say chose a hell of a place to go on vacation.
That's not a good place to go on vacation. I can tell you firsthand.
Well, dang. So I thought we could talk a little bit about the World Revolution series. And
yeah, that was a hell of a long run.
Yeah, and muse a little bit about being historians on YouTube. So, yeah, I'm trying to think of the first time you emailed me. I think way back in November of 2016. I think about this originally.
We were emailing back and forth for a long time there before we even started writing scripts. and I think we started writing scripts around that time.
Oh yeah. So the whole thing coming out, but then we released them over the period of a month. They went down really well. I hope it was as good for your channel as it was for mine.
Yeah, I
because those
think it
videos
went
are
over
really
well.
well received.
I haven't had only the last one got any kind of downvotes, and I think that's because it had a little bit of politics at the end of it.
Yeah, there's still this kind of concept on the internet that somehow media can't be political or something.
Hey, it's a political junkies with us.
Yeah, I just finished like this morning doing the podcast with them, so it's like a talking marathon today.
And hopefully your voice doesn't give out.
No. And if it does, that's what I got you for. So,
we historians can just keep talking. So get us on a roll.
We have the literal never-ending story.
Yeah.
I guess that'd be one question, is that this was your idea, though. The idea of the world revolutions, even the revolutions we covered were your baby. So I was wondering where this all came from.
Well, I was going and I was looking at episode ideas and that, and I kept on wanting to cover all of these things separately, but then I kind of realized that there was an overarching thing with this, and I started thinking about trying to do it all, and it was like, that's a lot. Mm-hmm. And I thought of you when because you've been doing a lot of more analytical stuff on your channel, and so I figured it would be a perfect fit, that the whole jumping from channel to channel thing and getting all 6 of them could work, and I think it did.
Yeah. Did I get all of the communist ones intentionally, or was that just happenstance?
Well, yeah, kind of happenstance, because I got the new left, and it was just because of the jumping back and forth, because then we had actually talked for a little bit about who would go first with because it was ultimately the order was going to be decided by who went first, and that would be the person covering the general crisis. And I think I think we decided that it would probably, because I've already done a bunch of research into the general crisis, that I could do that one, and that's what determined who would do what.
Yeah, it was kind of like a tricky one, and I also know that you kind of had you had an axe to grind about the general crisis. I had never heard of it, actually, before you had mentioned it.
Yeah, I took a class back in graduate school that was I think it was called Comparative World History, from Dr. Hopper, and he it was you might have seen those episodes I've done about why the West is strong. The idea that for some reason Europe and Western countries have come out on top, not just I mean, a lot of the time it's that kind of thing is based on racism and all that, but and but that class was about all the differing theories about how that came to be. How, you had probably the most famous book in the series was Guns, Germs, and Steel, but it had people like Eric Pomeranz, and you'll find some of them even linked in the description of the General Crisis video, because a lot of it centers on that general crisis, that idea that something was happening worldwide that shifted power to the west. Um, and so that was why I kind of had to axe to grind with it, because I spent an entire course studying exactly that as a revolution.
Cool. I was actually thinking that something that's so worldwide like that, because it's like the most, I mean, it's kind of before globalization, it's like the first global crisis. And I'm thinking that makes me think that there's something about like the beginning of the Little Ice Age or something.
Well, the Little Ice Age starts in what, the 1350s, something like that, and ends in 1850. So it's kind of right in the middle of it. But also, I don't really see so much of a environmental cause in it, although I could see that being argued. But what I see more is that several waves of I guess you could call them historical events, the Reformation, the Renaissance had been happening, and then things like enclosure and private banking were coming full circle. And this is when we had the poppy crisis in the Netherlands, the first big banking bubble, basically. And so it's kind of the thing that made the transition from early modern to modern eras.
So those two crises, or those two things happening together, makes me think that has to do, like, if I were to like think of like what would be a root cause of that those both seem kind of Gutenberg inspired.
Oh, you mean just because the printing press?
Like, yeah, but like the knock-on effects of having lots of cheap printing and writing and like growing literacy and that kind of stuff.
I would think that would be what you covered, the bourgeois revolution, because this one wasn't so much. This was of a class. The general crisis was of a class that either already read, was the same people were the readers in the 12th century as they were in the 17th century. But the difference being that power was being redistributed, as opposed to previous times in which powers was getting fragmented.
Okay. So this is like when succession starts to become more formalized and going in kind of a central direction. Like this is like when Spain and Ireland stop splitting up all of their lands after they die, when their nobles die, and like when things start to become, because this is like when you start getting like big emperors and like big things like the French, the Sun King and everything like that.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. The I keep on getting distracted by the conversation. And Prima Punchy is correct. It was tulips, not poppies.
You remembered Afghanistan, so you got distracted.
Having one of them flashbacks, man.
Yeah.
But this is definitely when the French consolidated. This is when basically everybody was either consolidating or completely failing. So the failures were obviously Ming China and the Holy Roman Empire, because this is basically when the Holy Roman Empire ceased to be. Well, I mean, as I'm forgetting the name of the historian who said it, but he said the Holy Roman Empire was never an empire, never holy, and never Roman. But it ceased to be a coherent entity by the end of the General Crisis, because it continued to fracture even after the 30 Years' War. It just kept on dissolving. I mean, the Habsburg Empire was basically done. But, well, the end of the General Crisis is generally considered to be the War of Spanish Succession, which is when the Habsburgs cease to have power in Spain and, you know, continued to lose power from there.
Fair enough. I can. Okay, yeah. This part of my European history is a little spotty.
Oh, trust me, I didn't know much about it before I took that class, and now I've read freaking 10 books on it. It's probably more than that, actually. It has made me rethink the importance of the General Crisis and all of that. But that's just one of the revolutions. We have a lot that we went over.
Yeah, it's true. Although we do have a few questions from the chat that we could probably talk about. So, someone was asked what historians do, which would be a fun one to talk about, because I imagine there's a big gap between what they think we do and what we actually do.
Sometimes, yeah. A lot of the time, being a historian just means that you write history, or at least I'm sure we can have differing definitions of what historian even means. Because for me, it's if you have contributed something to the scholarship in any way, you've written some sort of well-cited work that's published, then you're a historian. That means that you don't need a degree to be a historian. You just need to be contributing to the scholarship.
Oh yeah. So I think like the few things that are like really like base level stuff. I think when I think of historians, I think how different it is. Like, so many of my friends, fly to random ass places in the middle of the summer or for the summer and live in like a dark, musty cave, basically like taking notes based on old pieces of paper they find.
Yep. And I had a professor who was a historian of the Ottoman Empire. And so she would fly off to random places in the Middle East, and I mean, like, random towns that have no importance now, but just have these huge, backlogs, because the Ottomans never really, they didn't keep records very well. And yeah, she'd just sit there for a month or two in some random Middle Eastern town taking notes about what was written there.
Yeah, I do remember that, like, one of the craziest things for doing that kind of history that's super annoying is that Turks can't even read their old writing anymore because Ataturk changed the writing system. So before, like, I think it was like 1920 or something, the Turks, like, Turkish was written with the Arabic alphabet, and then they decided to just switch to the Latin one.
Yeah. And so, like, only a historian would be able to read that now.
Yeah.
But that's what a historian is somebody who delves into that stuff, I guess. But there's other forms of historians, there's there's curators, people who run museums, public history in general.
Which is kind of what we're doing.
Yeah, well, except for we don't really have footnotes, so that we can't really call what we do being a historian.
Fair enough.
Although I want to change that. I want to figure out a way of doing footnotes on these things.
You could have
But
like things like you could put in your description like a time code and then have like a thing, like a link or something.
my problem with the description is I can't. There's no italics.
Mm. So you
And
really want to keep the Chicago manual, huh?
oh yeah. Well, I mean, that's the standard, and if we do not adhere to that standard, then we're kind of shunning the entire profession.
Man, formalist are we?
Kind of have to be, don't we?
Yeah. So the other thing too is that then you spend the school year frantically trying to figure out what it is that you found and write about it. Um, but I spend my summers programming because my research all has to do with media and big data analysis. So whether or not that's history, I don't know. Some people in my department disagree with that being history.
Huh. Well, that's the thing. I mean, anybody can call themselves a historian. It's kind of like anybody can take on the name doctor, but that doesn't necessarily make them one. Just think how many fake doctors there are of like in terms of the medical field.
I like this guy who just came in, and his name is Jason Lee, which is like a rather English name. And his picture is like a picture of France with a French ball with like a beret and a mustache. And he just comes in and says taxation is theft, and that's just it. And that's great. I don't know. It's some things are best out of context.
uh, and Primal Punchy is apparently a historian now.
We're all historians now. So the other question they got, it's kind of talking about you and me and Will, political junkies dude, who's in the chat there, and is asking about why we're all so fixated on history of the West. And I mean, this could be labeled at the entire profession, so it'd be a good question to talk about.
Well, there's the Eurocentrism question right there. I mean, I think part of the problem is we're all in the West.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm on my channel right now. I'm doing a series on California history. I'm a Californian historian. I'm also live in California, so I focus on where I am. But there's definitely people who don't. There's definitely people who, like the professor I was talking about, who goes into Ottoman history and that. But for the most part, you tend to focus on what's available to you, and if you live in the West, then you tend to focus on the West. It's at least my perception of it.
Yeah, I think like probably the better funded history departments are in the West because of all of that money that we spent hundreds of years stealing from the rest of the world. And then doing history outside of your own culture is actually really hard because you have to learn a whole bunch of new languages and a whole lot of new cultural contexts. So that can actually be, it's not impossible, but it's a very difficult thing to do. And most people who do graduate work and such are usually motivated by a research question already. And so usually it's something to do with where they grew up or what they've experienced or something about their identity. So you find that like a lot of people do history of like their own country or their own state or their own community or something.
And that's the reason why, at least in American universities, you'll often find that it's something like 60 to 70% of the professors are Americanists. So you'll have like a few Europeanists, maybe is Asianist a word? I don't know if that's the term for it, but people who focus on Asia and that being Middle East or anywhere. Um, and the you're left with very little space in the curriculum for anything other than American history, or Western history, because even the few that aren't, you have a few Europeanists, and then you're left with like 2 or 3 non-Europe, non-America professors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the way it works here is kind of similar story, maybe a little bit inverse. Like I think probably at least 50% of the faculty, if not like 80% of the PhD students, are all Canadian historians, and they all hang out together and they all go to the same conferences, and so everyone who doesn't do that kind of is in their own world. And um, I think I might be the only person in my department doing a U.S. history topic. There used to be 2, but she changed to something in South Africa.
That's a switch.
She's from South Africa, so I think
Oh.
that she found some research question that was particularly interesting to her, and she decided to go with that.
Yeah, that's pretty typical. Well, I mean, the way I chose my, because I did my thesis on local history here in San Luis Obispo, and the I was originally looking at, because my old standard was just American Small Wars, but then I just kind of was doing a bunch of local history here, and a question came up, and suddenly I switched over to being a Californian historian. Like, that's
Yep.
that's the way it goes.
I kind of did something similar, but it was before grad school, and it was for a mix of sort of effort and work reasons. Because like I was interested in doing pre-Columbian Mesoamerican spiritual life, like late post classical, like basically like what would be called the Aztec Empire in like popular language.
uh,
And
that's a switch to what you're doing now.
yeah, and the main reason that I switched away is because I was at a tiny liberal arts university doing a history degree. And when I like looked at it objectively, and I was like, you know, if I wanted to do this program, I would need to, one, go to a way better university than I'm going to now. 2, learn Nahuatl, which is like kind of language of Central Mexico, which would involve taking a course that I think only one university outside of Mexico taught, which was like the University of Chicago, which anybody who studies history knows how easy that it is to get into.
Yeah, that's. I mean, nobody cares about going to the University of Chicago. Not at all.
No. Um,
Totally aren't responsible for people like frickin' um forgetting the name of the dude. Frontier Thesis. What's the name of it?
oh, Frederick Jackson Turner.
There we go.
Um,
Yeah.
So I would have to learn this new language, which is like used in hieroglyphics and spoken by a few remote communities still in Mexico. But then I would also need to basically go to a university that had an anthropology or archaeology program and take that, because there was no archaeology or anthropology program at my university.
Just so many barriers to doing anything outside of your own culture.
Yeah, exactly. This is a good example of like the kind of things that you have to do if you're really interested in these things. And so I ended up just doing this American topic because I thought like, oh, 9/11 is starting to get up there in age, and I'm sure being first to the PhD history dissertation on 9/11 would be a pretty cool topic. So
There's no other dissertations on 9/11 in the history field yet.
I think that they're probably, if they are coming out, there's not many, and the big ones haven't come out yet because I imagine that when something gets into the history books, it's usually when people who were kind of young when the event happened get old enough to write PhD dissertations, which is about now.
Hmm.
Because I think I was like about 13 when 9/11 happened, or 12 or 13. And so,
Oh well,
you
then
know,
we're pretty close to the same age because I was in middle school. I don't know. I was an eighth grader.
yeah, I think we are the same age. I think we're both 88ers.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
But
so 9/11 happened at a very formative time in our lives. And so it makes sense that this is about the time that the dissertations start happening.
yep. And the fact is, I fought in a war because of Afghanistan. I mean, because of 9/11, and like I've been focused on American small wars ever since,
Hmm.
and American violence and all that kind of stuff. And all of that basically is because of 9/11.
So and I also was really interested in like when I brought up the idea of doing a history topic on 9/11, they would say, well, like that's not history. And then my thought went to kind of a philosophical, like, well, what is history then?
To Anonymous, I went to Afghanistan in 2009 to 2010.
So you were part of Operation Enduring Freedom then.
Yep.
I don't know how
Right,
much you want to talk about that,
right,
but
right before the surge. The surge actually happened while I was there.
wasn't the surge in Iraq though?
They did a surge in Afghanistan in 2010.
All right, wasn't that about the time that they were? No, that's when they got out of Iraq.
Yeah,
They're still in
basically they
Afghanistan.
shifted focus from Iraq to Afghanistan in the vague hope that it would end. Funny.
Who'd have known that when you go and screw up the internal politics of a country with bombs and then say, all right, now make a country and make it work without any like forethought or setup.
Well, that's the thing about punitive wars. I mean, they're not meant to do something. They're not meant to do something positive. They're not meant to have have some sort of gain or anything. They're meant to be destructive, and that's what Afghanistan was.
Wasn't the whole reason though that you guys were in Afghanistan in the first place is because they basically were in a punitive war with the Soviet Union? And then
Well, the Soviet Union, first of all, that was a decade and a half prior. Um, but the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan because a communist party had been elected and then overthrown. Well,
mhm.
not overthrown, but was threatened to be overthrown because of a civil war, and they intervened into that civil war. So
I'm working on my War on Terror lecture. I'm doing a guest lecture for the U.S. survey course, so it's been on my mind.
yeah, so they kind of left with that Communist Party still in power in 1988,
89.
89, which falls right into the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I think by 1989 they were like, all right, we got some other things to deal with. Like, I know like the collapse of capitalism in communism in Afghanistan is a pretty good idea, but like the collapse of communism everywhere is kind of on our minds at the moment. So
Well, Gorbachev had been trying to get out of there for ever since he took power, but there had been fierce resistance. I mean, you have to remember Gorbachev actually served there, so
mhm.
he didn't want. I mean, it would be like me going and being president. I would not want to be in Afghanistan anymore.
It's true. They eventually though, like the reason I mentioned that though is just because all of the founders of Al Qaeda were basically like vets of that war. So
Yeah, well, it's certainly formative to Al Qaeda, but the Taliban and later Al Qaeda as a distinct entity um, were were offshoots of the Civil War that came afterward that actually had started and then was halted by the invasion of the Soviets and then continued again. So basically the Soviets invading just kind of hit the pause button rather than doing any kind, rather than, at least I see it as not being a reason for Al Qaeda. I think that it's often, we like to blame the West for anything we can. Oftentimes, especially things like Al Qaeda, and that we want to blame ourselves, but that doesn't really fit with the history there.
Well, then I have some revisions to do.
But that's also having to look at the Soviets' invasion from their perspective, which, you know, NATO countries don't exactly want to do.
That's true. I mean, like, there was, I mean, I think like there was a long trend of a lot of stuff going on in that region in like the 1970s, 1980s, where there was a lot of kind of socially progressive modernization, kind of the remnants of the student movement. But then there's kind of like a Salafi ultra-conservative backlash that really starts to get ground in Afghanistan. And like, you know, an ultra-conservative Muslim government or Muslim Shia groups in like Iran and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Iran had just had their revolution in '78, and then like 1 year later, Afghanistan happens. So you could see that there was something going on that was an overall trend. I don't know enough about it to say one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. It's a fun question. So let's see if there's any fun. Man, there's like there's a good conversation going on about the Great Game and about I guess Icelandic and Welsh and other hard to pronounce languages.
Yeah. Well, they were talking about Nahuatl a little bit earlier because you brought it up.
Mm-hmm. It's a tongue twister of a language, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Much like with Icelandic and with Welsh, they're like languages that had their alphabets added later.
I think Welsh just likes to add letters for the sheer heck of it, just to make it more obtuse.
It happens a lot with these languages that were all verbal languages that then like codified into text much later in their development than some other ones. And so like I know like what little I've heard of like Mohawk, for example, is also like that.
And Mohawk was a form of Iroquois, right?
Yeah, that I don't know exactly how the languages are related, but they were part of the same confederacy.
Yeah, I don't know if they count as separate languages or dialects, or I don't know anything about that. I only know the wars.
Well, we did have one question that kind of would be an interesting back and forth because of our two channels' kind of philosophy, and that is history too preoccupied with war?
Yes. And I'm certainly guilty of it. I know that you don't want to look at war on yours, and you know, even what you had to cover in this World Revolution series that we did was a lot more war than you would ever normally feature.
It's true. I always see war as like when a house collapses, like or like an earthquake or something like that, where it's this sudden violent event, but typically is the result of pressures and erosion and neglect in different things, and then something just makes it all collapse, and then everything has to get built over again.
Well, that's certainly a way of looking at big war. Like Actually, I got a video coming out. It's all edited and uploaded and everything on the origin of why the U.S. joined World War One. And it'll be looking a lot at like those kinds of things. But then you go to small wars, like what I used to like to focus on a lot, and when you start looking at that, it's not as easy to look at as sudden bursts of violence, but more kind of background radiation of violence. Like we're basically never at war, never not at war, or never at peace. And so when you see it as that, then trying to avoid war become as a subject is impossible.
That's true. I mean, I was like thinking of the like list of wars that the United States has been involved with, and how there's been like 200 of them or something. But some of them are like 3-week long wars between like the United States Army and like the Apaches of this region, and it's like,
well, you'll find also that there's another episode that I think I have it recorded. I haven't started editing it. It's is Afghanistan our longest war? And that's more of a question than one that I can answer, because it more depends on what you define as war. But with Indian wars, for instance, sometimes you can say that, like in the case of the Sioux War, I did an episode with Jabsy on the Sioux War. The Sioux Wars is that they're distinct, separate things. But then there's also things like the Comanche. Definitely the Comanche. They basically were in a state of war for about 50 years. So
yeah, I read the big book on the Comanches for one of my classes. It was really what's the one by like, it's like by like Hamilton Pakkanen or something like that, like some Finnish dude wrote some like really big book on the Comanches that's got like all the awards.
No, I haven't. The one that I really like on that is Patricia Limerick. I'm forgetting what the name of the book is. The Legacy of Conquest, I think. Fascinating thing about the Coloradan Indian Wars. She's a professor at Colorado, so dude, the Comanche, and also I just finished up Violence Over the Land, which is by Ned Blackhawk, and he's more looking at the Utes and the Paiutes and the Shoshones, but the Utes were allied with the Comanche for a long time, and so got a lot of that there too.
Yeah, I think like for the audience, one of the cool things about the Comanches that make them a little different from typical like Native American groups is they're kind of like this. They're like a Native American group that came to existence after contact, and they're kind of like a mishmash of different like fractions and like refugees from different groups that kind of decided to say, hey, let's get on horses and like live in this zone between empires and kind of make everybody's life like a living hell. And they kind of, for almost a century, if not over a century, kind of had this space they carved out for themselves.
Yeah, basically from 1680 all the way until our last battle with them in the 1870s. We, the Spanish, the Mexicans, were constantly at war with them, and it's kind of because their whole tribal existence is came about because they wanted to engage in war. I mean, that is their tribal identity. It's warfare. Unlike basically anything, I can't think of any group that was formed out of war, existed in war, and really only was around because of war.
Mm-hmm. I do have another fun question that's being tossed from the chat room that I've been interested to talk about, and maybe I'll bring up in the future with some other guests. But I definitely want to get some take on it, and that is the fiction genre of alternate history, and the people who write alternate histories. They're wondering what our take is on these people.
Well, I'm going to probably alienate some people by saying I kind of despise this alternate history. I view it as kind of pointless.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't like to play the what if game, and because there's just so many pitfalls there. We only have the story that we know, which is history, and that's hard enough to get at as it is. Why do we need alternate? Now, fiction, on the other hand, that's different. But alternate history, yeah, I kind of hate it.
I have the position, like, I don't know if they do this much in the U.S., but one of the interesting thought experiments that I like to do with undergrads is typically these kind of counterfactual situations, and it's not so much good as a thought experiment or anything like that. But what it does do is that it kind of teaches the idea of contingency thinking and weighing different trends. So if you get students to think through well, what if this hadn't happened, then it gets them thinking through all of the other trends going on at the time so that they can formulate their speculations. And then that they're kind of using their brains a little bit.
Well, I definitely don't get me. I don't disagree with imagining that. I mean, who doesn't like this freaking the Amazon series Man in High Castle? It's fun. Mm-hmm. But there's a whole trend in terms of alternate history of trying to say that this is what would have happened. The idea that we can have some sort of answer about, what if the South won the Civil War or something like that. There's entire books written on that.
Yeesh.
Yeah, and it gets, heck, there's a fake documentary out there that it's kind of funny, actually.
Oh yeah, CSA, Confederate States of America. That's a fun documentary. I love that one.
It's silly as all hell, but they're also trying to state this is what would happen, and it's just no, this is all games. And as soon as you make that jump from it being a game to this being legitimate history, is where I find fault in it.
Yeah, and also they seem to focus on things where maybe there's some sort of particular axe to grind or some sort of ideology at work. There's a lot of people who seem to think a whole lot about the Confederates winning the Civil War or the Germans winning World War II.
That seems to be the two big ones. Or if the British had, well, I mean, it's that holy trinity of history, the freaking Civil War, World War II, and American Revolution. They like to try to look at those as what if it went the other way, but also it does seem like there is an ideology behind what they're trying to state, as you say.
Yeah, I was thinking of actually making a video. This is something that I can tell, just between you and me and the 15 people watching right now. I was thinking of doing a series, and I probably will at some point whenever I get around to it. This would be kind of like a new ongoing series, and it would be dead countries, and it would kind of be like short histories or a history of countries that no longer exist and kind of what created them, what their context was, and why they were gone. And all things point to me starting with the Confederate States of America. And I wanted to do a little bit on Southern redemption narrative and stuff like that, which
The New South and the Lost Cause and all that.
yeah, because I'm thinking in the future of making mini episodes that kind of come out a week before my big episodes, and maybe when I do the Confederate States of America, I'll do a little one on Southern redemption, and why is Gone with the Wind kind of a problematic story?
Yeah, that could that. See, I have a episode on the cause. What was the cause of the Civil War? And I even playfully at the beginning of it go like, it was slavery, and cut the episode.
Yeah.
And the but I go deep into it, and yet there's still people who comment regularly saying like, it wasn't about slavery, it didn't have anything to do about slavery, and you're just sitting there like, well, I know what camp you're coming from.
It's about states' rights. States' rights for what?
It's something.
Yeah, like what's it called? I always think like if it wasn't about slavery, like what the hell were Douglas and Lincoln doing for all of those debates then?
Yeah. Why was Lincoln not on the ballot? Why did the South secede? Why did they constantly mention slavery as a cause?
Why is it that after the Emancipation Proclamation happened, like black people just abandoned the South in droves and like, went in huge waves of refugees across the border?
Yeah. I mean, fact is, Lincoln did say, if I could have brought this is paraphrasing, I don't know the exact quote, but if I could have brought the South back into the Union without freeing a single slave, then I would have.
Oh yeah, Lincoln was no saint.
It's one of our best presidents, though.
But like he was it was a calculated thing to, because like near the middle of the war, like support was starting to wane and recruitment was down, and it was a way to kind of turn this into a real cause rather than just like
get back the states.
We need to fight to reintegrate our country. Yeah, it's a harder sell.
And he was amazing in terms of that cold calculation of for instance, refusing to remove troops from the South once they had seceded. The reason why Fort Sumter was attacked was because American troops were there and basically being an occupying force, even though the United States refused to recognize the Confederate States. So he used this actually, he kind of got it from Polk, who did the same thing with Mexico. And used the attack on Fort Sumter to start the war.
Yeah, I imagine there was a little bit of like, maybe they're just playing chicken, and if we, scare them enough, they'll just kind of give up. Like I bet, like, I don't know if he knew how fanatic it had gotten at some points.
And think about it, the South Carolina had seceded in December, I think, of 1860, and the secession crisis ensued, and it took 5 months of them actually having seceded before any fighting happens. That's a long time and that's just everybody staring at each other.
Yeah, I imagine
December
that there was like a
22nd,
lot of like
thanks,
desperate
Anonymous.
attempts to get everyone back. December 22nd, 1860.
Looking up stuff
Merry
while listening
Christmas.
to talking. uh,
I still do that. I TA these sometimes, and if I like want to remember a name or an event or something, I'll just be like, "Hey, someone with a laptop, go and figure figure that out for me."
yeah. Um, the oh yeah, we were talking about I forgot we were talking about alternate history.
I don't know. We're just kind of going,
Yeah.
just ride.
That's what historians do, isn't it? Um, and but if Lincoln hadn't been playing that game and instead actually pulled out troops in that, then we probably would be dealing with a not dealing with a separate country. But we'll never know. And getting it all the way back to the whole alternate history thing, that's the point where you have to draw the line and say this is absurd. You can't postulate that something else wouldn't have caused the war. You can't postulate that something else couldn't have done what was done. You get a lot of this thing, the whole great man history thing that people look at somebody and say, oh, well, this guy, John Locke figured out social contract theory, and if it weren't for John Locke, then the United States never would have come to be. And it's that kind of alternate history is kind of difficult for me to abide by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to see that, like, if I don't know, if Lincoln hadn't clinched the Republican nomination, what like a weaker person, like, I don't know, Seward or something would have done, and it probably would have been fun to see, especially because I'm like picturing some sort of like southern backwater, like super poor country, in the long term, but
Yeah, it's fun to imagine. The it's there's got to be a point in which when it comes to alternate history, that you say this is all silly.
mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, yeah. It although it makes good fiction.
Man in High Castle. I mean, that's Robert Heinlein right
Have
there.
you been watching 11 the James Franco 11/22/63 show? I think it was a Hulu original. Everyone has an original now.
11/2/63.
Yeah, it's like it's a TV show based on a Stephen King novel where almost like literally a character can go through a plot hole and they end up in the United States in like 1960, and basically James Franco goes back to 1960 to like stop JFK's assassination. But first he has to be absolutely sure that Lee Harvey Oswald did it.
There's a show I've been watching, Timeless. Have you seen that?
It's on my list of things to watch.
The main character is a historian, but the most ridiculously stereotypical historian. Like, she'll so the whole plot centers around time travel, and it's one of those like, oh, there's time traveling terrorists and they're going to make things bad by going back in history and changing events and then altering the future. And they task this historian with another couple of people to go and try to sort things out, and they need a historian to do this. And like every time they bring up something, it's like, oh, we're going back to April 24th, 1924, and she goes, oh, the Hindenburg. And like then she'll be like, It's April 1st, 1865. Lincoln's assassination or something along those lines. It's just like she somehow has this like Rolodex of dates in her mind, and that's how like the entire show functions.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the other misunderstanding about historians, especially when you get into the academic realm. Like, if anybody asked me any detail about like, I don't know, just like some random part of history that I don't know, like outside of like the like part that you're like laser focused on, you start to be very, very dumb very fast.
Yeah. I mean, that's the I have a father who's a historian, and he always likes to say, um, "I might not know it now, but I can find out in a couple of hours."
Yeah, I'm liking this thing in the comments of can we get an episode of Timeless where they go back to November 8th, 2016? Because it looks like the terrorists won. I'm not sure how we fix that.
November 8th,
2016.
I don't know what that date is referring to.
It was the day when
yeah.
you got the day you elected the God Emperor.
I don't remember a good chunk of that night because I got freaking wasted. And it was not a good kind of wasted. I woke up with the only hangover I've ever had in my life, and
was it sad drunk or mad drunk?
A bit of both, I think. I remember people getting in fights in the bar. Like,
oh god,
it was nobody was happy here.
Alcohol in the 2016 election,
except for the one person who decided to come in with a "Make America Great Again" hat, who got in a fight almost immediately. And yeah, that was bad. I was not happy.
Was that Missouri? Like, I thought in Missouri he'd be like, pretty normal.
No, it's San Luis Obispo, California is where.
Oh, for some reason, my brain went to St. Louis, and I was like, why are you like?
No, slow San Luis Obispo. We had a the Women's March thing that happened right after the inauguration.
Yeah, we had one here.
Yeah, we had the pretty big one here. In fact, the town is 45,000 people. The Women's March was 7,000 people. So just think how big that was.
Yeah. I remember
I walked downtown thinking like, I don't know what's going on. I'm just gonna go and see what's going on, and then it turned into this like huge event.
Mm-hmm. My wife's American, so she got really into the Women's March, and we went to it together, and it was a pretty good day. I do remember the election night because we watched it here. We had a party because anybody who was like Trump was like feeling kind of cocky on November 8th. I think most people admit that now. 538 told us that we were pretty comfy. I was a little scared because, as someone who's a little bit more on the radical leftist socialisty side, was like, I've seen this before. This is not good. I thought that even if Trump loses, that this was going to be not good. But then someone made a cake, like an orange Trumpster fire cake. They actually took. Do you know the Donald Trump that I made for one of my videos?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they printed that on a cake, and it got less funny as the night moved along.
Yeah. I remember when I was walking home right after work, and it was 5:00 here, which means like a good chunk of the polls were already wrapping up. And I'm talking on the phone with somebody over in Vegas, and he's saying like, no, seriously, it's going Trump, and I'm just saying like, nah, those are exit polls. Come on. Like, I just refuse to believe it.
Yeah. It was actually I was in the middle of my comps when that happened.
Well, like take-home comps or in the room kind?
The take-home comps. I was writing it, and the department actually came like this close to giving everybody who was doing comps that week a 1-day extension. And they were especially considering it for me in particular because I was the only person doing the American field. And so they knew that I would kind of be shell-shocked and unproductive that day. And I was, but I just kind of doubled down for the rest of the week.
Yeah. I showed up to work like an hour late the next day, and I was on a construction site that day too.
Oh my gosh, working with power tools and your first hangover ever. I feel for you, man.
I haven't had a hangover since, and hell, I had a heck of a weekend this weekend.
Oh man. The only time I got belligerently drunk related to Trump was on Inauguration Day.
I remember watching the inauguration speech and like just trying to take a shot every time he says something stupid, and I remember just like getting more and more angry.
Mm-hmm. But you know what? As historians, this is where I think that we have a value. This is why when people ask what historian has a value to people, and that is, I think I said this when I got interviewed for a newspaper a little while back, and that is historians, I think, are a more important resource for understanding Trump than a lot of the current political pundits, because the kind of stuff that Trump is tapping into are more trends that have been happening on like the 40, 50, 60, 100-year time scale than like, the last like 20 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but also there's newer stuff like internet, social bubbles, where we're kind of all looking at our own mirrors because we filter because algorithms filter the media to the point that we only get what we want. But then there's also the fact that Trump is playing on the deindustrialization of the American Midwest, the kind of nativism that's been present for centuries. I mean, a lot of the time he reminded me of the Know Nothings. Is this what a Know Nothing president would have been?
Maybe. I remember that like he compares himself, and a lot of people have compared him to Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, actually, Political Junkies in the comments right now, and he did an entire episode on that, which I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, that is it was one of his better videos. Unfortunately, I want to see like the next part of it, because I think and like the more Trumpish parts of Andrew Jackson are like his war with the bank, where like he basically destroyed American financial stability over a personal vendetta, and like
yeah. Well, I mean, it's more than just a personal vendetta. He had been saying he had campaigned on it. It wasn't the bank was seen as a corrupting institution. So I mean, there's more to it than just a political vendetta. But at the same time, he was certainly one who was quick to fight. Just look at how many duels he got into.
Yeah, he's like the only president in U.S. history who like flat out murdered a dude and got elected president afterwards.
Yeah.
He literally shot somebody in Fifth Avenue and got elected anyway.
I mean, when he did it, dueling wasn't illegal until 1823. I don't remember when he did it. But dueling wasn't illegal until 1823, and heck, fast forward to California in the 1850s, and dueling was more of a problem here than it ever was in any of the United States. There were more duels that happened in the what's called the Bloody 50s here than did most states in their entire history.
And this is California in the 1850s?
Yeah. Well, late 1840s, obviously 1849, gold rush.
Yeah, but like also America's reach wasn't with California wasn't all that strong. Its grasp on California wasn't all that heavy back then.
It was actually more strong than was in the 1840s. The national control, the federal control of California was much stronger than it was when it became a state, because it was a military governorship, and alcaldes were because they maintained the Mexican system, which was maintaining the Spanish system, but they were basically in control of the gold rush. And it's not really a lack of control that was it wasn't their inability to do it. It was just the fact that so many people came rushing in. So much craziness was happening because gold.
Gold.
Also,
so then how do you explain all the robots and the whole Robert Ford building things, hole digging?
Robert Ford?
Oh, I'm trying to... I was making a very obtuse reference to the HBO series Westworld.
Oh. Is that supposed to happen in California?
It's supposed to take place in some like made-up theme park of like the Wild West that never existed.
Yeah, I actually watched the whole series and the original movie. The new series is better than the movie, but it kind of
has a low bar to hit. It goes HBO series, then it's the Simpsons parody with Itchy and Scratchy Land, then the actual movie.
The movie was fun though. Lots of killing. That's what we want in the movie, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. But the cool thing is that the one of the characters who made Westworld, like the guy, the guy who Anthony Hopkins plays,
mm-hmm.
is Robert Ford. And the funny thing about that is that that's the name of the guy who killed Jesse
James.
Yeah, Jesse James. And like Jesse James's death is considered like the death of the Wild West, and like I don't know, it's kind of a cool thing there.
I don't obviously as a Western historian, the whole Wild West thing kind of triggers a bunch of like no wrong, just because movies and all that give such a false impression of what life was like out here, that I mean, for instance, Jesse James, his uncle had a farm that was about 30 miles that way from here, and so he actually spent some time hiding out here in San Luis Obispo, SLO.
Mm-hmm.
And like also the Dalton gang got started here. I mean, like there's just so many things like that you think of as these kind of romantic stories that when you look at them, they're just kind of a bunch of assholes.
It's a good way to put it. Do you know our story about our Wild West at all?
I don't know. No, not really.
All right. So around 1900, we realized in Ottawa that we hadn't done anything with all of the Western Territory that we had been like guaranteed because of the agreement with the 49th parallel and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so we didn't know what to do. We had like, the British Columbia, Vancouver area, and then nothing, and then you have like Ontario. And so we were thinking we better get some people over there at some point before the Americans take it, because you know how Americans, they'll just move into any territory. They invaded us in 1812. They'll do it again.
They did. I mean, part of the what is it called? The Lower Revolt or whatever. You know how there's the Upper Canada Revolt and the Lower Canada Revolt.
Yeah.
Part of that involved a bunch of filibusters from America.
Makes sense. So like they were like, how can we settle people in like this Saskatchewan we hear so much about? And so I think like a lot of the towns in Saskatchewan and stuff were all founded like in like the first decade of the 20th century. Like it's so late to the settlement game.
Wow.
So much so that by 2020, Saskatchewan is expected to be majority Native American again.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Don't you guys call them First Peoples, though? Or First Nations? First
Nations, Native Canadians, whichever you prefer to go with, I guess.
The trend recently in America has been kind of pushing away from the whole Native American thing, because that has some nativist tendencies. And Anonymous corrected me again, and it's the Patriot War that I was referring to.
The Patriot War, or is this a different one? Because there was this attempt, there was this brief armed rebellion in the I think it was like in the 1850s, where Quebec tried to kind of have its own American Revolution, and it failed miserably.
That would sound about right. It's been a long time since I did the research on that thing, but there was some filibustering activity in that. But it's kind of weird that because didn't you guys also have a lot of fur trapping activity in the West for much longer than the fur trade happened here?
I think that was majorly what our economy was in those regions until like the 20th century, when we decided to start like growing wheat. But it's led to some strange things, because then we found out that Alberta's made of oil, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, we're having our own troubles here because of that.
Yep.
Trump is reviving the whole DAPL thing, and oh god.
Yeah, we are. There's a lot of people in Canada who are super pissed at Justin Trudeau over being on board with all these things, these pipelines.
I thought nobody was angry with Trudeau. I thought nobody could be angry with Trudeau.
Everybody was in love with Trudeau for like a year, but then it's also because Trudeau was just kind of like the Obama honeymoon period, where everyone was just so happy that he wasn't George Bush for a while. But then he started doing stuff, and then we were like, oh, right, he's still a politician. And so he started approving all these pipelines. He started selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, despite being a self-described feminist. And like, he walked back on his major election promise.
Which was?
To move Canada towards proportional representation.
That I am not familiar with your guys' politics enough to know what that means.
So our politics is we have a bicameral system as well. Same with the United States, just we don't have a president, and our senators are appointed like they used to be in the U.S. But
oh wow, still?
Yeah, I mean, their job is not so much to. They're supposed to be like kind of the revise and resubmit type people on laws. So it's usually a job for like prominent politicians who have retired and such like that. But anyways, we still have a first past the post parliament, which is our main form of government, like your house.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's very similar to like the Westminster system in that sense. But he was, because like in 2011, when you have more than two political parties, you start having problems with first past the post systems, because then you had a prime minister who had 100% of the government power with 39% of the popular vote, which was not the best.
Well, I mean, that's almost the same percentage that Lincoln got elected under. He got elected with 40%.
Yeah, so what the idea was, and Trudeau got elected with something like 41%. And the reason is because we're split in our left between the Liberals and the Social Democratic New Democratic Party. Or the New Democratic Party, or the NDP.
Rick Mercer. Who's
Rick Mercer is kind of like he's like a Canadian. He's like a Canadian version of he does like a Canadian version of The Daily Show.
Oh, so he's like Jon Stewart?
Yeah, he's like a Jon Stewart. He's less funny though.
Aw. I don't know. Our current Daily Show is less funny too. So
yeah, it's still good, but it's not as good as it used to be.
yeah, and he doesn't seem to be growing into it.
Trevor Noah seems like he's a very talented comedian, but he's doing the wrong show.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's why I like watching the different offshoots. You know, the I forgot her name.
Samantha Bee
and John Oliver.
John Oliver's been pretty good. Samantha Bee, I go through liking and being a little angry with, because she's kind of a grump.
Yeah, and also she jumps on the left train so hard that she seems to miss it sometimes. You know, that she like.
But she also kind of.
Go ahead.
She kind of has like a special hatred for the far left. Like she has she interviewed.
You mean the far right?
Oh, she hates the far right, but she also really doesn't like the far left. Like she interviewed Gary Johnson on her show, and when Jill Stein came forward and was like, "Hey, why don't I come on too?" And she basically took a huge shit on Jill Stein and hated Bernie Sanders and all of this stuff, and it was like, oh goodness.
Yeah. I mean, she's an establishment Democrat. That's very clear. But there's also been times that she's she still has been being a denizen of the internet. You know, we all remember when the whole Pepe thing became racist, and she jumped on that hardcore, and still puts it in every show, and it's just you need to back off, consider what you're doing, think about the connotations of what you're trying to say here, and that's just one minor little thing. It's in every freaking show, so she keeps on reminding us of her error.
Yeah, but then again, sometimes she hits the mark. Someone just said, yes, you called Jill Stein far left. Listen, as far as American politics go, she's as far left as is legal. So,
yeah, you're not going to get communists
and
anarchists in any kind of potential for president.
And you're never going to get a late night talk show host supporting Antifa or something.
Yeah, no.
But as far as the acceptable, what's that scale of the acceptable political spectrum in any given country? How some countries, there's this thing in political science where the left-right dynamic is different in every country, because if you took Hillary Clinton out of the United States and had her run for politics in Canada, she'd be considered a radical conservative, radical right-wing conservative.
Yep.
While if Stephen Harper, our conservative prime minister, ran for president of the United States, he would be considered somewhere between Clinton and Sanders. He'd be totally a Democrat.
Yeah, it's funky, and then there's also a lot of issues that are considered to be somewhat just a given in places like America, where like problems with representation in Canada, where that is considered kind of a leftist thing, and here it's like, wait, you guys still like I saw a political junkie called it, isn't it kind of like the House of Lords?
Yeah.
I mean, basically that's what you guys have, and it's like here we're like, why? Why would you continue that? Why wouldn't you set up? Why wouldn't you follow through with that promise? And so some things that would be termed left there are considered like not non-issues here.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I got distracted about the whole thing about proportional representation. Justin Trudeau kind of promised that he would move to something that would be kind of like how the Netherlands government works, where like you have 300 and something seats, and if 1% if they get 1% of the vote, they get 1% of the seats. That kind of thing.
Huh. But
so there'd be no like local stuff anymore.
So yeah, there wouldn't. I don't know if your Senate is, because our Senate is specifically set up to make states more sovereign, so that it's not just New York and California running everything. It makes our system both representative of people as a whole, but also as states. And I don't know if that's the case up there.
No, Canada is entirely rep by pop. Like we are like entirely tyranny by majority. But in response to that, though, that's our federal government. But we have two. Like our federal government is a confederacy, so the federal government's role is much smaller. So in Canada, you have like you have Ontario and Quebec basically make all the shots in our federal government, but the provinces are much more autonomous than they would be in the U.S.
Huh. Just funny because we call them states, and like that's supposed to represent how autonomous they are. But then again, there's a certain levels of freedom that the states maintain, and in fact, the whole differentiation between the whole well, I guess you could call it states' rights, but it's not referring to that particular issue. But the idea of state sovereignty is the basis of the right to privacy, how there's just a lot of things like that that are implied greater power by the states that aren't exactly represented in specific language, but through action.
I think that something broke up, but I didn't get quite a little bit in the middle of that. I got a little lost.
Yeah, somebody's using a blow dryer outside my door. I'm just saying that states here have a lot more sovereignty than what would initially appear given the language of the law. But also there's plenty of times in which the federal government kind of stomps on that, and it's up to the Supreme Court to overrule it, But just as with the right to privacy thing being basically being created because of Roe v. Wade, we haven't had enough of that to maintain the federal government from staying away from such affairs.
Okay. Yeah, for us, I think it's like the federal government has like a few domains that it is told to take care of, and the provinces take care of everything else. So like unless it has to do with foreign affairs or interprovincial stuff, then or the military, like then provinces take care of it. But sometimes they do stuff like our healthcare system, which is put in our constitution that they have to provide a universal healthcare service. But then each province's job is to figure out how to do it themselves.
Yeah, and that tends to go awry sometimes. I know that Quebec, or is it Quebec or Quebec?
It's Quebec. In
Quebec.
French, they don't really have that qua sound.
But Quebec has had some problems with their healthcare system. I know that.
Quebec has had a problem with their everything system. It's I've lived there for a number of years, and I am like it's a part of my ethnic background, but they're a little bit of a political mess just because their politics are a little bit of a mess, and it means that there's a lot of like rampant corruption and a lot of like there's a lot of like mafia owning construction companies that then get these like really kind of corrupt contracts with the government, and so there's a lot of like 5 people building a one pothole or something like that. And so I don't know how Quebec feels about Trudeau. I think that if you're like a comfy Montrealer, you like him, but I don't think that the like hardcore people who remember the October crisis like him very much because of the kind of the crap his dad pulled. But I did get one question. I don't even know what this means. Maybe you'll be able to answer it for me. But someone asked thoughts about Sweden having a conical empire. I don't know if that means colonial or as if like an empire shaped like a cone.
It probably meant the hey, somebody's asking who the bearded guy is, but we're both
Which
bearded.
One?
But obviously it means me. My name's Cypher. I'm the cynical historian. But I think they probably just mean colonial. Probably mistyped it.
Comical empire. That one works too. It reminds me of an old joke with that I used to make with my friends. We were making this whole gag about how much Sweden's culture has changed over the years. And like if it had all mashed together, and we were talking about like the social democratic Vikings who had like, wheelchair accessible longboats and like kind of IKEA based like rating supplies and stuff. It's like, oh, man.
Hey, I mean, like the Viking show on
history. It's on history. It's what History Channel calls history these days.
Yeah, but they pointed out something that is real. Forgetting the name. The dude who they show in the thing wielding an axe on a chariot, and this happened like 2 weeks ago. They showed a famous Viking, and forgetting his name, who literally took a chariot to England. And that really happened. So, I mean, I guess you can have wheelchair accessible longboats.
Oh, man. How did he take a chariot to England? Isn't there like some water somewhere?
He just rode across the sea on it. I don't know.
It's just like, what's it called? Like, what was it, Caligula, who made like all the boats tie together so he could ride his boat across the Mediterranean or something?
Oh, Caligula had he had a famous boat that they recently discovered like a decade ago or something like that. That no wait, that was fascist Italy who found it. But he had a boat that was literally built on a small lake, and took up a good chunk of the lake.
Oh gosh.
And then sunk it immediately, of course.
It's like when I found out that Mongolia has a navy.
Wait, what?
Mongolia, the country, has a navy. It has one ship with like 30 people on it, and it's in this lake. But like it has like the Mongolian navy, all of the stuff. But yeah, I wonder. Actually, now I'm thinking about Caligula, and I'm wondering how much of his story is like I really hope that he was as crazy as everyone says he was, and it's not just like great stories.
Problem is, we've got mostly Plutarch to thank for it. I'm not an ancient historian, so I can't speak to it that much. But you have famous early historians who were
they wrote alternative history.
Yeah, well, Plutarch, his live series was supposed to be comparative history. That it was like the life of a good dude versus the life of a bad dude.
I got someone who asked who the step back guy is, and that would be me. Hello, I am the step back one. Yeah. So so just shows how little we actually know about the real ancient past, the classics. Because they kind of were all written by like the Kellyanne Conways of their day.
Well, yeah. Although there's certainly shining examples. I mean, I always bring up Thucydides as most historians don't have a problem with Thucydides. They think of Thucydides as like the shining example of good history up until Gibbons.
Yeah. I know that there's like some like, because I remember I took like a history of history, and how like in the Middle Ages they had their idea because they knew that the Bible was true, and so their plan was that if anything that they found didn't fit, or if the evidence wasn't there, then they had to make the evidence because it had to fit. And so a lot of things like it throws a lot of wrenches in a lot of historical fields, because there's a lot of primary sources that are supposed to be from a period, but then you find out that they were like written hundreds of years later by some monk because it had to happen that way, because that's how history was written. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, well, the other thing is a lot of Homer's Odyssey was dictated through a microwave.
Yeah, there you go.
But the well, I mean, Kellyanne Conway, yeah. There you go. But a lot of that stuff came about as a part of the Renaissance as well. Is that that these were sources that were left in the Byzantine Empire, and once that fell, suddenly you had a flood of ancient sources that needed to be copied. And then you also had the printing press coming about at the same time, and suddenly you have this flood of new primary sources. So we get a lot of that written around the late 15th and early 16th century as well. Plus there's everything in Ireland, which was kind of a haven for lost ancient sources for a while.
Yeah, it's true. I always think of like one of like when it comes to like the historical Jesus discussion, which I'm not sure if we want to touch that with a 40-yard poll, because I haven't read like Mountain's books written about it. But I thought that somebody was like, wait a minute, this writing about Jesus in Josephus, which is like a Roman historian, is kind of like very medieval.
I have Josephus on the shelf, and literally there's only one part that he mentions Christ, and like, hell, let me just grab it real quick. Josephus, and pretty sure I don't have it bookmarked, of course. But the part that he talks about Christ, is really obviously different. When you read it, it is clearly like something inserted.
Okay.
And then there's other parts of it that are supposed to be referring to Christians. He talks about the various sects of Judaism, and one of those is supposed to be Christian, but it's called like Duon or something like that, which I don't know how people are getting Christian out of that.
I don't know. Probably speaking into some conversation that I don't remember very well. But I do have a couple questions that I've been getting. These have come up multiple times, so I feel like we should address them in some capacity. One is, what do I think about Sweden's attempts at a colonial empire? And I'm thinking, when did that happen?
Sweden was a very powerful entity. The general crisis was kind of the end of their power, the beginning and end of their power.
The colonies? Like, are you talking about like Gotland or something?
We're talking Poland. And
oh.
Yeah.
Go on.
Between the time of troubles in Russia and all the way to the Great Northern War in the early 18th century, Sweden was an expanding power, and it was the Great Northern War that shifted the balance of power to Russia. So basically, Sweden was the big power in the East before the Great Northern War. So if we think of Russia as being a colonial power, well, that colonial power was shifted to Sweden up until 1715.
Now that sounds like the Social Democratic Vikings I want to hear about. So then, okay. And then after that would have been like that Poland-Lithuania thing for a while, like the Poland-Lithuanian Commonwealth country
that never was. Poland was always kind of in the middle of empire, especially at this point, from the general crisis onward. They were independent at times. They were, Russian. They were Swedish. They were Prussian. They were just they were French. There's just all these varying powers controlled Poland. Heck, the last time that happened was 1939. So there you go.
Yeah, so I guess this is like their best stretch at independence that they've had so far. And it's only been like since the late 80s. The other question I got here was about mapping channels like Emperor Tiger Star. Have you heard of these?
Oh yeah, I'm subscribed to Emperor Tiger Star.
So I guess that they asked for their take on them. You seem to know a bit more than me. I've seen them, but I don't have much to say. What do you think of them?
Well, they do some good work. They essentially make maps that are historical maps of and try to tell history through just cartography. So Emperor Tiger Star is probably the most famous of them, but there's actually a whole bunch of channels that do this, because they'll just take like a blank map from Wikipedia and then just draw borders and use that to illustrate wars, use that to illustrate expanding power and stuff like that. It's kind of interesting. I don't want to see a map the entire time I'm watching a documentary, though, so like it's not exactly for me. But they do a lot of good work that way.
Now, I do have to say, this is the kind of mapping channel that I got really perversely interested in, just because I don't understand anything about it. So this is not what you're talking about. This is not like the history thing, but these will be channels that will do something like the future history of Europe on a map, and what it will be is like a soap opera made through geopolitics, and like they'll actually have they'll have like the countries talking to each other, but like not done with audio. It's all done with like paint, like MS Paint, where they'll just like draw words over top the map, and it'll have like the countries talking to each other and invading each other with like no precedent or reason whatsoever. Like it'll just be like Turkey decided to invade the Ukraine because they got in a fight over something. They're just like, I don't like you anymore, and then they just invade, and then Russia will be like, I'll help you, Ukraine. And I mean, that actually does sound like something Russia would do. They just wouldn't give it back. But but like they would do these things, and they would make these videos, and there's so many of them. There's like at least 10 channels that are like this, and I don't understand why. I don't understand how it works.
It's kind of that whole alt history thing that it's like it's purely imaginative. It has no basis in reality, but it sounds like it could be fun.
It's like they're playing. It's interesting. It's like art. It's like they're playing with maps in the way that like people play with action figures. Like it's like they're just like hitting them against each other, and you'll be like, all right, these two are gonna fight now, rah, rah. And it's like
they're
okay.
playing Risk.
And these channels also seem to skew to fairly young people. Like a lot of these people seem to be like 12 to 15.
Wow. Okay.
The kind of people who are also really into the Poland ball stuff.
Oh yeah, I've seen a lot of people who like the whole country ball thing, but sometimes that's used to great effect. Sometimes that's actually like used for historical explanation, and I've seen plenty of channels that do that. That and they do some. Apparently, I'm missing a party out there.
Nice.
There is. It's a useful tool. I could see myself using it in the future, but I don't know. I never really wanted to go with the whole cartoony look. I wanted to stick with the pictures, but it gets hard at times.
Yeah, I mean, I've been coming up on anthropomorphizing countries for my work, and I think it will happen in the future a lot more. But I don't think I'll use balls, because I feel like I'm stepping into a conversation that I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, there does seem to be some sort of cultural significance around it, and I don't know what that is.
Yeah. But yeah, these channels with the maps and stuff like that. I remember I lost like an afternoon because I think somebody was watching my channel who was part of this community and shared it with a bunch of their friends, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of people from these channels subscribed to my channel, and I started like looking at them and being like just fascinated as like I don't understand what is this language they speak, and it was really fun.
Yeah, one of my ones that I ran into recently was music groups that like to talk about history. So, like, my favorite is thus far is Sabaton. Ever heard of that?
Okay, yeah.
They're a heavy metal band that just talks about historical events.
Yeah, they made a music pack for Paradox's Europa Universalis 4.
We were talking about other channels that do mapping. Oliby is in the comments, and He's actually oh, he's one of those mappers.
Okay. I also have been told there's over 2,000 mapping channels. It's a lot of maps.
But yeah, getting back to Sabaton, so they have like they recently let out a CD that was a bunch of that were just songs about last stands. So you have like Shiriyama, Kursk, freaking the Lost Battalion, and so I mean these are major historical events that they're just singing about how awesome they are. Like the title the title track, which is just last stand or something like that, is about the 1526 sack of Rome and the 180 some odd folks who actually tried to defend the Vatican to the last man, like literally just killed to the last man on the steps of the Vatican. This massive battle where these dudes fought off thousands of people. It was and so they bring that up in song. Oh, maybe someday I'll make an episode about like music that makes the history nerd in me happy.
That'd be pretty cool. Yeah, Sabaton. I know that there's also a concept album that was a bio album for Charlemagne, and it had Christopher Lee singing in it.
Oh,
and it's one of the greatest things to happen in musical history.
Yeah, that one's great.
A man in his late 80s at the time making a metal album about Charlemagne. It's like, all right.
Christopher Lee was awesome, though. I mean, he was a secret agent during World War II, right?
I do remember hearing that, but oh man, that's crazy.
Yeah. And then he went and played Dracula for a couple of decades.
Like, yeah, okay. I remember one of the things that I got really into when I was young was the extra stuff on those like super special edition Lord of the Rings DVDs. Like when the Lord of the Rings came out, they made these like uber special edition DVDs with a lot of additional content. And I remember I got really into those. And I just remember the first one is that Ian McKellen was just like, yeah, when I first worked with Christopher Lee, I was a little apprehensive because, his work kind of, sucked. And then we had a good time anyway. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee had he was like the Greatest Generation's, oh God. Now the name escapes me. Just a second. Who's God? It's like the actor who has like an almost 50-50 good movie, bad movie ratio.
Freaking the guy who does Taken.
No, not him. Not the Bees.
Oh no, the one who does Taken, the Taken series.
Oh yeah, that's oh God, Leslie Nielsen. Or no, wait, that's not Leslie Nielsen's
something Nielsen though. But yeah, 50-50 good bad. But we are getting off topic here.
Yeah, I mean, at some point we're gonna have to go and break for some supper or something. But whatever. This is what the fun's supposed to be. It's for the fans.
You're right. They're still talking about mapping down there, though.
Yeah, well, as I said, the mapping community embraced me to their bosom at some point about a year ago, and so there's a lot of them there.
Yeah, they. I'm surprised at how many channels there are. Alibi is definitely one of them. And Leslie Nielsen. But the
It's
there are
Liam
definitely
Neeson.
some
Liam Neeson. And the name
close.
I was trying to think of was Nicolas Cage.
Oh no, that's like 75% bad.
Did you do a video for Lord of War? I feel like you did, but I
No,
don't remember.
Lord
That'd
of
be a good
War
one to
isn't
check
based
out.
on a true story though.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it's definitely very fictional. I like that movie though. Um,
Mm-hmm.
although there's a lot of movies that I do reviews of that I like, and then once I review them, I hate. um, like Braveheart was probably one of those, but before I actually reviewed it, I I watched it, and then you kind of start to realize how bad it is months after watching it. You go and like look up something, and then you're like, wait, what? He he was not from the Highlands? What? And then you steadily come into the realization of you've been fooled.
I mean, The Patriot's not much better, but you know.
Yeah, but at least it's not based on a true story.
Okay, yeah,
Like
yeah.
there's certainly some stuff in it that are just like, why would you even depict that? Um, but at the same time, you can get away with a lot more when it's fiction. But when you
Mm-hmm.
start bringing in real people who have real stories that we know,
So then, when's your Inglorious Bastards video coming out then?
oh man, I I love oh, what's the name of that director?
Quentin Tarantino.
Quentin Tarantino. Yeah, I actually quoted the Hateful Eight in my thesis.
Nice.
the
My thesis was about Islamophobia, so I felt like I couldn't be funny ever.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Mine was about vigilantes and it's called um Pacifying Paradise: Violence and Vigilantism in San Luis Obispo. It's about killing a lot of people. Most violent time in this state's history, let alone this county.
Mm-hmm.
And but you can always find humor in the footnotes.
That's true. I guess like my master's was not in history; it was in American studies, and so it was about post 9/11 Islamophobia, and I was like reading like real statistics on hate crimes and things like that, and it was just not fun. I seem to be obsessed with watching like videos or doing research on things that make me sad.
I think that's kind of what a lot of historians are at. Like, I've always focused on when like for instance my when I was looking at just American Small Wars, my most studied thing, the only thing that I've actually been published on in terms of that subject is the Russian intervention from 1918 to 1920, when the U.S., Canada, there were actually quite a few Canadian troops. There were a lot more than English troops, or British or anyone from the islands. Well, there were Irish troops, but invaded Russia and took over more territory than than the Russians. And so it's kind of a little known war, but with huge, long reaching implications and just done over the dumbest reasons. Like I called it the thing I published was called A Study in Confusion.
Yeah.
The British decision to intervene. And the it is we tend to study what we dislike the most. That's why I've often focused on President Wilson and his wars.
Mr. Wilson. I have the Calhoun book here somewhere.
I recognize that name.
He wrote a book called Uses of Force, which is like a kind of not Monday night quarterback, but more like a detailed analysis of every time that Wilson used military force and like tried to explain trying to like unpack his foreign policy using this.
I think I read an article from that guy then.
Like there's a chapter on Pancho Villa, there's a chapter on the Dominican, there's a chapter on the occupation of Veracruz. There's a chapter on World War I and
yep. And like the episode that I have coming out on the causes of World War I, which is literally going to be coming out the day of the century anniversary of our declaration of war. A lot of it's going to be focusing on that stuff because it's all kind of intertwined. And when you start looking at this what I had earlier called the background radiation of violence, you kind of see that these bigger wars are the result of these smaller wars. That World War I was less a distinct war in and of itself, but part of all this other stuff going on.
Sounds like this minor war thing sounds pretty cool because it's like way more it's kind of challenging the periodization of warfare in a way, and it's kind of we call these things wars, but they're really kind of just ongoing conflicts of displacement or
Power.
Invasion or it's kind of like it's funny because like they use like the trappings of the wins and losses and treaties and all that kind of stuff like it's a legit war, but it's kind of more like bullying.
Yeah, and then you start to see big wars in a very different light as well when you start studying this kind of stuff. And it gets back to the conversation that we were having about wanting to not cover war. And that's where I kind of differ, is that there's a difference between being a big war historian, like I study World War II and Civil War and that kind of thing, who look at the battles and the strategy and all that kind of stuff, know every minute weapon variation that came out during the war. And then there's less military historian, but more just like regular historian who are concerned about the effects, because violence is change. And so you want a lot of the time we say that history is just this, the study of history is just change over time. And what greater illustration of change over time is than people killing each other?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't avoid wars as much as I do avoid military history. I think that might be the better way to describe it, because military history is, to me, like it's like the leaf collector branch of history.
Leaf collector.
Where it's like to them, history seems less about analyzing as it is like kind of the old notion, the 19th century notion of history, which is like, we just want to have a good collection of accurate facts and we'll put them in a big fact book. And the book will be
that kind of old idea of the fact brick, that you could like make a totally coherent story from facts that are a totally indisputable story by layering on all the bricks.
19th century 7,000 word history of France type things. Although maybe not France, because the Annales school meant that they were a little bit better than that, but
Well, that's not 19th century. That's late 40s and early 50s.
Yeah, there's still there's the intellectual. I think I think the early French historians were a little bit less A little bit more continental.
Yeah, I don't know. The whole early history thing, when Ronka and all that were getting started, really got co-opted by nationalism hardcore. So it's kind of difficult to separate them from just like philosophizing, and that really never changed in France.
I like this. I just like this declaration of the anarcho-communist rebellion of the Republic of Step Back History. I just want to give that attention. I'm down. Because you know that a country is more free the longer its name is. That's why the People's Democratic Republic of Congo was such a great country. And
I just
People's Democratic Republic of North Korea, or People's Democratic Republic of Korea.
I just did a bunch of research into Hotel Rwanda and then the whole Zaire Congo wars and that. Oh boy, I'm going to be getting into that.
But you definitely know that the freer a country is the more adjectives you put before its name.
Especially when you have to say that you are democratic or a republic or anything like that. Although, I mean, the United States of America, that's 3.
We used to be the Dominion of Canada, but that got taken away.
What is the official title? Is it just Canada?
It is just Canada now.
Okay.
Before we were the Dominion of Canada, which is like this whole the Dominions.
Up until 1947.
I think it was shortly before. I think we were a little bit earlier because there's a whole thing about Canada having its own military by World War I. And we make a big deal of the fact that we declared war on Germany one day after Great Britain, so that we were technically independent or something. I don't know.
You still have the queen on. You still have the queen on your currency, though.
Yeah, but we have our own constitution. It used to be in England, but then we repatriated it in 1981.
Obviously, having a constitution isn't quite enough because I mean, look at say England itself, or anywhere in Great Britain right now, which no one has a constitution.
I also am liking this this part here of the anarcho-capitalist republic, totally not fascist country, free land and federation, capitalism and stuff of Ancapistan. That is a great country name. And also the idea of dominions being linked to Deep Space Nine, which was an amazing show. And
oh yes.
Now I'm just thinking of
so you're a Trekkie, yeah?
I mean, you couldn't have grown up in my house with my dad and not end up a Trekkie of some kind.
Honestly, it surprises me when I find a historian who's not a Trekkie.
Yeah. The future and the past seem to be every historian that I've met are not just like interested in historical stuff, but they're also huge into science fiction and usually into futurism as well.
Oh man, have you ever read I have it right here. I have it leather-bound because I like it so much. Isaac Asimov's The Foundation series.
Oh yeah, I've been wanting to read that for years.
The main character it's science fiction with historians as the main characters. Except for these historians have figured out how to calculate the future.
Yeah, it's like a future history textbook or something, right?
Kinda. It's more that these historians who have figured out how to they literally take out calculators and calculate the future from their historical studies. So scientific history taken to its nth extent. And
nice.
And then they which when I was taking my historiography class back in grad school, the name of these guys made me laugh at the real life equivalent, which is they call them psychohistorians, which you might know of psychohistory. But
yeah, it's a not exactly an uncontroversial thing.
totally not. But that knowing that book made me laugh every time I heard that name, because like these guys are like scientific historians with, you know, that they can calculate the future, and then they plan the future by like figuring out what they need to do to save the empire, the galactic empire. And like, yeah, this is one of my favorite books of all time. But you would think that historians would be more focused on past stuff, but I read, for fiction, I read science fiction.
Everyone does. Maybe not everyone, but yeah, the whole thing about Canada getting independence. Someone thought I said declared independence. It was more like we had independence imposed upon us. Britain was like kind of like a parent that was trying to so subtly kick their kids out of the house because they had turned 18.
Yeah, that's kind of with a lot of. I mean, that's kind of what happened with Australia, and they took even longer. Like they weren't really independent until the 70s. Like it's kind of weird how the British Empire kind of like, besides places like India where they had to actually like rebel, you know, we had Gandhi in that, but then you have other places like Australia and that who are just kind of like sent kicking out the door.
Yep, settler colonies, man. We got it made.
Well, except for places like here,
yeah,
who rebelled fairly early on.
See what you guys just took. You guys just were impatient. If you had just waited until the late 19th century, they would have let you go too. So we got. Okay, so there's just. I feel like we've been going for 2 hours, so I'm gonna take maybe a couple last questions, and then we'll be on with our day. How's that sound?
Okay.
I do want to make another shout out to the anarcho-capitalist rebellion of the United Videos of the Republic of Step Back History, but this is I also I know this is quickly turning into a thing at a rapid speed. So if you have any quick questions before we go, we have thoughts on the Emu War, which I feel like is one of those things that Wikipedia has kind of turned into a historical event.
Well, I mean, it's been called the Emu War since well before that, but I mean, essentially they just needed to get rid of a bunch of emus in the outback and sent in machine guns.
Yeah, but I think what makes it really funny is that what like has cemented it in history is the fact that Wikipedia classifies it as an actual war.
Yeah.
They use the war formatting page, which makes it so amazing.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, does Wikipedia do that for like the war on drugs and things like that? You know,
they do. They don't even do it with the war on terror. So,
wait, really?
No, the war on terror has its own page.
That's Global pretty, War on Terror is not a full like war page.
I don't think so. I think it's like because it's treated as an international global campaign, not a war. Whatever, which I don't know. That's like the most amount of words to dance around saying world war as possible, but you know.
Well, it's got the belligerents lists and the commanders and all that. Wow, this is a long thing.
Yeah, it's really crazy when you start finding out about like the war on terror with the American troops in the Philippines, and you're like, wait, that happened? And like, yeah, it's happening now.
Wait, American troops in the Philippines?
Not troops, like CIA.
Yeah. Stuff. Oh yeah. I try not to get into CIA stuff because that's a freaking pit to dig, because we just had our hands in everything, and we still kind of do.
Yeah, you want to talk about the violent background radiation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not like small wars stopped happening as well. We're currently in one, Afghanistan. Like, that is a small war.
It's the biggest small war in American history.
No, not by a long shot.
No.
Oh no, the Russian intervention was bigger than the this current war. But we've had plenty of you talk about the Philippines. Look at the Philippines. 1899 and 1914.
Remember when Trump bragged about that? Like, bragged about the dipping bullets in pig's blood and stuff, and it was like, oh no.
Oh yeah.
Like, oh, come on, man. It's like when he bragged about Operation Wetback, and you're like, no, don't do that. No good. No good. Like, next, like, I was worried that, like, sometime he was actually going to be like,
meme wars,
like, or like talking about like how great Japanese internment was or something, and everyone's like, no, stop.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember people like posting like, we will resist if he tries this, and just like, no, he's not going to try it. He's just talking out his ass as he normally does.
Yep. Or when he kind of spoke as if he thought that Frederick Douglass was still alive. Anyways, I do have a couple cool questions. One is a history question, one is about our work, and one is what our thoughts are on the business plot.
Dude, I actually will be talking about the business plot in my World War I thing. That keeps on coming up.
This video on the path then.
The business plot was essentially, supposedly, historians have been coming around to thinking it's more and more true, but it used to be just laughed at as something that Smedley Butler just made up. But Smedley Butler told Congress that he had been informed of a plot to overthrow the presidency and install him as a fascist dictator of America in 1932. And that led to a big investigation of not the business plot or anything, but for some reason World War One.
Alrighty. I do have some recurring questions about the invasion of Gambia. Do you know anything about this? This is news to me, so.
No, I don't.
I don't have much to say. And then I guess the last question, which is a pretty good one, and also will make a reference to your World War I video, which is kind of some discussion about the futures of our channels. So what's next for the Cynical Historian?
Well, I keep on trying to... I got one more episode of the California history stuff coming out, and I'm going to take a break from that because I'm going to end at 1848 just in time for the gold rush, because that's a big episode in of itself if I ever get around to making it. But otherwise, I'm just going to keep on going with the I might try to do some more state histories, though. I seem to have found something that people like.
That's good SEO, I imagine.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of good feedback on it, and I like these kinds of like history of things that, because I do a lot more analytical stuff, but then these history of things tend to fall onto channels like the what was the one with the Green Brothers, the Vlog Brothers,
like,
got the name of it.
Talking about their Crash Course series, or
Crash Course, yeah. It falls onto that kind of stuff, and they're just not analytical enough, They're not being told by historians, they're being told by the Green Brothers. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I like that series, but sometimes you want to be a little bit more involved.
Yeah, there's definitely room for more. I agree. And
of course, I'm also going to be doing the continuing with the movie stuff. In fact, when I hit 10,000 subscribers, I'm going to do one on Patton, because there are a bunch of personal reasons to do that one. So that'll be like a big subscriber special there.
Nice. As for my channel, I just 2 days ago, maybe just yesterday, hit 18,000 subscribers, which is a pretty fun milestone. It's been a pretty crazy year as far as growth goes. That we really should have swapped off, because that communism video, like the rise of communism, it's that was a juicy one.
Hey, the new left's got plenty on it too.
Yeah, and then I have a whole lot of big channel changes coming up over the next year, including doing this monthly. Last Sunday of every month, I'm going to have a hangout, different guests, different guests can come back, so don't worry, Cypher. You're always welcome back. Talk about history, talk about whatever's going on, and a clip from this will be up, but then I'll also have a second channel where this whole thing will be up, so that if you are one of those people who really wants to watch the whole thing, it'll be available in a form. But I'm going to find a good 15-minute clip from this and put it up on the channel a little bit later. And I guess I have another video in the works that is a little blocked up because of my dissertation proposal, which has kind of dominated my life for the last few weeks. So
yeah. I might be moving on to PhD myself. Apparently, I've been accepted. So, well, see how that goes.
I imagine you don't want to say where, but is it in California at least?
No.
What? Are you going to do California history for it?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't have a distinct. I mean, you understand you often come up with an idea, and then by the time you're actually proposing the dissertation, it's you're on a completely different subject by then.
Yeah, that's pretty true.
And that was certainly the case for my thesis.
Opinion on the Vermont Republics. All right, before we start talking about Vermont Republics, I think we should take this up. As I always say, like the fact that we are asked our opinion on the Vermont Republic shows that this is an amazing community of people, and I'm really glad to have shared a few hours with you. And I want to thank you, Cypher, for joining me today.
I'm glad to see everybody in the comments, and this has been a great conversation.
Yeah, and I hope that everybody here, if you like Cypher's words, because he obviously he has a way better memory than I do, you should check out his channel, The Cynical Historian. As far as like rigorous historiosity and like being a professional, I think you're really rocking it. So,
your channel has been nailing it at this series that we did. This thing is going to freaking hopefully keep on accruing views, because I don't think there's anything that's been done like this before. So,
and I'm sure we'll come back to another thing in the future.
Hopefully we can come up with something along these lines again.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I imagine that there's something there. Anyways, take care, everybody. Take care of yourselves and each other. Peace.
Bye.
And micro war.
Yeah. War never ends, man.
Oh, man.
So